Hi, my name is Steven and welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be talking to you about my life lessons learned part 2, a guide to living on your own. This episode is all about the life lessons I've learned while living by myself. This is part 2 of my series on the lessons I've learned throughout my life, and I'll cover different aspects of my life now that I'm older, wiser, and able to distill that information to others. Looking back on my life, there's a lot of things that I could have done differently had I had a guide to help me through it. The ultimate goal is to provide a how-to guide so that others don't have to follow my mistakes. So one of the biggest milestones that usually everyone has to encounter is living by themselves for the first time in their lives. It might happen at different stages of life for each and every individual, but the trials and tribulations are the same. Because when we first move out, we encounter the same kind of universal problems that everyone has to go through. Living by myself for the first time was really a wake-up call for me because I was really sheltered by my parents. My parents wanted to do everything for me while I was growing up, so I had limited opportunity for me to stretch my own legs. And it left me quite unprepared for the challenges I had to face when I was by myself for the first time. So these are my lessons learned and experiences by living by myself that I hope to distill to others. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about my background, my lessons learned, and my general thoughts on living by yourself. And before we start, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends, hit that notification bell if you like this content. And let's go. So I formally moved out of my parents' house when I was 23, and let me tell you, it wasn't a pleasant experience. After I got into grad school, I decided to move closer to the city to be closer to my work and school. This didn't sit well with my mother, and she threw all kinds of fits asking me to stay, and she would present different arguments for me to stay home. My mother and I had constant arguments about this, and it really cemented my reasons for leaving. For me, it was the right time to leave. I'd saved enough money, and I was old enough to do things on my own. And it was still close enough to my parents' house that if I had to go back, I could. Now, if grad school had been closer to my parents' house, I would have reconsidered, but because they were farther away, I knew my option must be to move out. So after moving to my one-bedroom apartment near downtown LA, I quickly realized that life wasn't gonna be the same. It was like I had to relearn how I interacted with the world, because nothing I do relied on my parents anymore. The first few months for me living on my own was really difficult. I had to relearn everything and create new habits for myself. Because when you first move out, there's a lot of logistical challenges that you don't realize you need because your parents did those things for you. And if you don't pick up these things quickly, living by yourself can be quite painful. Habits, logistics, and way of life can be completely different when you're on your own for the first time in your life. So now let's go through some of my lessons learned by living by yourself. Number 1, prepare for random expenses. I was definitely not prepared for all the random things that you need to buy and have on hand when you first move out. There are a lot of things that I took for granted, living under someone else's roof that I didn't even realize I needed moving out. These are all the things that you need only one of or are a unique set of something. For example, shower curtains, kitchen utensils, and toolkits. These are things that it's hard to know beforehand that you need until you get there the first day and then you're missing it. These extra stuff definitely were not cheap, so budget accordingly when you first move out. And usually these are in addition to the furniture you would get for your apartment. And even after living by yourself for a while, random expenses still pop up from time to time. Things ultimately break down, especially if you bought cheap versions of them, so you always need to have money in reserve for replacements. Planning financially for these things is up to you. There's no one else to help you through it. And that's one of the more challenging things by living by yourself. You have no one else but you to rely on. So when you're living alone, be sure to have miscellaneous expenses counted throughout your monthly budget. I would say every month stockpile $100 or $200 for miscellaneous expenses that might come up along the way. Number 2, living in silence. That first night when I was in my apartment by myself was very weird. It was oddly quiet. This was in direct contrast to the life I've been living in my parents' house, where it was loud and arguments happened all the time. Living by yourself, you are often alone and there's no other people talking to you. And for the most part, this is normal, so you have to eventually get used to the silence it brings. I know many people that are very uncomfortable with pure silence. They need some noise to help them process life. They either have music or TV in the background to help them drown out the silence. And I think this helps them through loneliness as well, because there's always some person talking to them. I think that if you can or have the willpower, try living in silence for as long as you possibly can. It is much better in the long term for you to be able to adapt to that silence. I had the TV going in the background myself for the first month I was living by myself, but then I quickly turned it off. And I was able to do that because I gradually got adapted to the silence when the TV or the radio wasn't on. And in those periods of silence, I realized that I can concentrate and focus on things much better. And this really helped with the schoolwork that I was working on at the time. And I was able to concentrate and be way more productive than I would have had with a TV on. And over time, I used that silence to help me calm my mind so I was less stressed and have less anxiety overall. So learning to live with silence while you're living alone can be really great for your mind. And once you're able to live with silence, you can never go back to a noisy environment again. Number 3, don't be a hermit. When you're living by yourself, it can be really easy to hide yourself away and never leave your apartment. As someone with experience with this, don't do it. When you don't have anyone to tell you what to do and when to do it, you can easily find yourself wasting a lot of that time. I spent my time playing a lot of video games when I was by myself for the first time, because nobody told me what to do and I didn't really have good boundaries when I was younger. And I would have to say that for the first few months, playing video games non-stop was really fun. Over time, my school and work suffered as a result, so I had to scale that back and create boundaries for myself. When you're living by yourself, it's really important more than ever to go out and seek new people all the time. Especially if you're in a new location where you're not surrounded by your hometown friends. And for me, it wasn't until I moved out of LA that I realized that I couldn't be a hermit in my apartment. Because that would have been too easy and I wouldn't have made long-term friends in the new place that I moved to. And due to the pandemic, we all heard the negative impacts of social isolation from one another. And it can have real consequences on the mental health of those who are socially isolated from each other. So it's really important when you first move out to have strong social connections with other people. My go-to strategy when I'm living by myself is to try to do one thing outside of the house each and every day. Either doing a hobby or meeting up with people or going to a restaurant. This method allows you not to have sequential days back to back at home, because it can be really easy to build up the habit to just stay home every single day. So get out, make friends, and don't be a hermit. Number 4, learn to cook. It seems silly, but when I first moved out, I didn't think I needed to learn how to cook well. I was caught completely unprepared that I needed to cook in order for me to eat. I didn't realize the amount of meals I needed every single week. 3 meals a day for 7 days, 21 meals total. It was a lot. At home, my mom prepared the majority of the meals for me, so I didn't really have to think about it. So when I first moved out, I realized I had to cook it myself or order takeout. Those first few months living by myself, I had to spend a lot of money on takeout while I was ramping up my cooking skills. And I also gained a lot of weight because the food that I was eating for takeout wasn't necessarily healthy. And also I began to get tired of the takeout food as well. I wanted something home cooked. So in those first few months, I started making ramen, pastaroni, and simple fried rice dishes. It was very limited in its variety and taste, but I had to start from somewhere. And also in the beginning, it was very carb intensive. I struggled to put in vegetables and fruits as part of my diet. If I were to give my younger self any advice, is to learn to cook earlier before you move out. And learn the basics of cooking through YouTube, friends, or a formal class. I would also tell my younger self to get an Instant Pot with an air fryer option, so I can fry up stuff and batch cook meals throughout the entire week. And also to get a blender so I can mix up fruits and vegetables in quick smoothies. The ultimate goal is to get better at cooking so you don't rely on expensive and unhealthy takeout foods all the time. It was really hard for me in the beginning because I had to baby step it and learn from various different sources. And I had to cook the same thing multiple times before I was even able to get it to taste good. So when you're moving out by yourself for the first time, be sure to have basic cooking lessons down because you're going to have to rely on them a lot. And number 5, reflect on your life. One of the most important things that happened to me when I moved out for the first time was my ability to reflect on my life. And I used this reflection to ultimately better myself to the man I am today. I grew up in a toxic childhood in which I didn't really know what a normal childhood looked like. And in that toxic environment, it really lasted until I left my parents' house. Because the same conditions when I was a little kid persisted all the way until I was 23. So when I left home and lived by myself, I suddenly escaped that toxic environment into a neutral environment. Not only was this environment completely silent, but it had none of the negative triggers of my old environment. When I was first living by myself, I went through long periods of time without the need to express any negative emotions. And this quietness was such a game changer because I didn't know that it could actually exist. I used this time to rewire myself to a better individual. I spent many nights wondering and discovering who I was and who I wanted to be. And it was very liberating to be both mentally and physically free from my parents. When you're living by yourself, it's a key time to reflect on who you are and who you want to be. And no one can tell you whether you should or you shouldn't do something. You are in control of your own destiny, so make good choices with it. So now let's talk about my general thoughts on living by yourself. I realized that moving out by yourself is a privilege and it takes huge financial resources to pull it off. Even just a decade ago, it was far easier to move out by yourself then than it is now with the huge increases in rent. But I think the core takeaway of this is that if you have the opportunity to live by yourself, take it and learn from that experience. Because I think it's beneficial for everyone to try at least once in their lifetime. It can gain you a lot of skills and confidence in yourself to be able to say that you've lived by yourself and survived. And preferably, the younger you do it, the more you're able to gain over your lifetime through this experience. Because eventually, everybody will have to deal with paying rent, utilities, and managing their individual lives. And lastly, I severely underestimated how moving out and living alone would impact my life. Moving out was the most substantial thing that I've ever done, and it had a profound and lasting effect on my life moving forward. I realized that I was not a slave to my circumstances and that with action, I could change my life to anything that I wanted to be. I used what I've learned through living by myself as the basis of my confidence, knowing that I can live and thrive wherever I need to be without the help of others. That's an immense confidence booster in anybody's ability to navigate through life. So don't underestimate the changing experience of living by yourself. So those were my lessons learned by living by yourself. In those first few months living by myself, I learned a tremendous amount of life experience. Although it was really tough and I didn't have people to lean on, it was a critical time in my life to make those mistakes. It was a transformative experience and showed me what I needed to do in order for me to survive by myself in this world. Doing everything yourself and problem solving along the way gave me that extra confidence basis that I needed to start my life. It was very liberating for me to do what I want and when I wanted to do it without someone second guessing me. And the skills that I've learned along the way helps me even to this day. I do wish that my parents taught me more and provided me more tools so that I would be able to live by myself, but I can't look into the past. I have to look into the future. This video is an attempt to help provide guidance for those trying to live by themselves for the first time, and give them a better head start than what I had to work with. So thank you for watching. Please leave me a comment down below on what are your thoughts on moving out for the first time and what advice would you give to them. And I'll see you next time.